Hi, this is Zach with Worn & Wound, and today I'll be taking a look at the Fairer Aqua Compressor Hecla. So Fairer is a brand we've covered a few times now on Worn & Wound, and this is their newest release. They've only been around for about 2 years, but they've done quite a lot in those 2 years that have impressed not just us, but I think a lot of the watch world at large. They're operating at quite a high level of quality as well as creativity, which is really exciting to see. So initially we looked at a quartz watch, and then there was an automatic follow-up to that, and then a set of GMTs, which were very unexpected and very attractive. And now they've gone kind of even further with what they're capable of doing and developed a whole new case and a whole new sport watch concept. So the Aqua Compressor, as the name suggests, is a line of dive watches with a vintage-styled case that utilizes the compressor case concept. So for those familiar, there's a type of case called a compressor, often referred to as a super compressor, and people mistakenly think that that just means a watch case with 2 crowns, because a lot of those cases did have 2 crowns for an internal bezel. But what it actually is a type of case that was created by a specific case company in the mid-20th century. It's called EPSA, and what it did was as the watch went further down under the water and the pressure increased around it, the case back actually sealed tighter on the watch around an O-ring. In theory, I guess, until it went down so far that the watch itself would implode. So watches since then have used many different methods of securing high water resistance, but for the sake of kind of a tribute to the past, as well as a bit of, I think, an engineering task, challenge for themselves, Fairer went ahead and recreated that compressor concept, therefore earning the title Aqua Compressor. So from just a straight up nerdy standpoint, you have this really cool kind of behind the scenes story for this watch. Then you just have a series of very attractive and appealing dive watches with a design that frankly stands out from the crowd right now. I mean, we see tons of dive watches every year, and many have a kind of similar feeling to them. And I think Fairer did a really good job of finding a unique language that kind of kept true to their core aesthetics. They use a lot of color, they use a lot of texture, they're very into layering, and you can see all of that in the watches. So what's really curious actually about what they've done, and they do this through all their lines, is the 3 watches that have come out, the Hecla, which we have here, the Endeavor, and the Levin, aren't 3 colorways of one design. Each one has its own design. They all have internal bezels, they all have the same case, but the dials are wildly different. So you have 3 very actually different aesthetics. This one, the Hecla, is kind of their most modern in feeling and has, in some ways, the most complex dial construction. So we thought it would be particularly interesting to take a look at. So starting though with the case, you have this great barrel-shaped case with really beautiful finishing on it and really nice just machining. It's beautifully curved around the corners. It's a polished edge around the bezel here. Domed sapphire crystal. It's 2.2 millimeters thick. It's a 300-meter dive watch, which is beyond substantial for your daily or even professional, semi-professional needs, depending on how you're going to use this. It measures 41.5 millimeters wide, which is a really nice size for a dive watch, I have to say. Often dive watches are larger. I really think 40, 41 is a really nice sweet spot. With this case shape, it works really well, particularly because the lug length here is 45 millimeters, so that's actually quite short. That and the fact they have integrated strap here. It also comes with a bracelet, which we don't have, but it's really cool that it comes with both. Makes it wear extremely well, which you'll see on the wrist. It's also only 12.5 millimeters thick, which is really nice and thin. Once again, dive watches often get really up there. So this wears just like a very comfortable sport watch, but it has the credentials you need for a real dive watch. Obviously on this side you have 2 dual crowns, and they're very interesting looking crowns. So for the time you have a Fairer's signature bronze crown, and don't worry for people who are aware of all the dive watch needs, this does have a a steel stem to it, so the bronze is just on the outside. I really like the fact that they use contrasting crowns. I know it's not for everyone. To me, it's a really cool, distinctive feature that at some point will really be something that'll set the brand and their aesthetic apart. Then for the internal bezel crown, you have a steel crown. Once again, having the contrasting crowns is doubly interesting, I think. Really kind of makes them stand out. But the crown shape themselves is really curious. It's a kind of a conical shape, but it's long. And that actually makes it really nice to grasp. So here, it just very quickly engages with your fingers. It's very easy to take out. These are both screw-down crowns. And yeah, I just happen to think it's a very appealing design. There's also cross-hatching on the outer surfaces, which is, once again, a throwback to those 60s watches with the compressor cases. With the internal bezel crown out, I might as well just talk quickly about the mechanism here. So it is a non-ratcheting mechanism, so it doesn't click, but it also doesn't turn back. So that's actually pretty unique. I don't know if I've seen one that operates smoothly, but then only operates one direction. That's a nice little feature of this watch. Because it doesn't click, I do think you have to pay a little mind to where you're landing, because it's like it's up to you really to land on the exact spot, but that is not really all too much of an issue. Flipping the watch over now, you can see the display case back that they have here, which shows off the ETA 2824 elaborate grade movement. ETA 2824 workhorse movement. We've seen it many, many times. It's a confidence-inspiring movement. The fact that this one's elaborate grade does set it a little bit apart, especially at the price point of $12.95. Because it is plated, it is regulated in 3 positions, has some nice decoration on it, has what they call snailing. So it actually is very appealing looking in the light. They also have a customized rotor here. They have some really nice little waveforms. There's ferrous submersible on it. And one really interesting feature is that this watch lacks a date. And rather than just covering up the date wheel, this features a 2824 that is actually without a date. So the crown only has one position when you pull it out. There's no phantom date position, which, that doesn't really affect the quality of the watch, but it's a really nice attention to detail, and it's something you're really not seeing very often, so it's cool that Fair could pull this off. Looking now at the dial of the Hecla Aqua Compressor, there's really a lot going on, and they have what they call a floating dial. So there's actually 3 layers to this dial, and then the internal bezel. So the base layer, which is this white area you see around the blue and in these 5-minute markers or hour markers, is actually a layer beneath that is fully loomed, and that glows bright, bright blue. Then you have the floating dial, which is this sunray blue surface, very, very bright, rich blue, with a waveform pattern printed on that. Then on top of that, you have the 12, 3, 6, and 9 applied numerals, which are also filled with lume. So, that's just a very complex dial. Usually when you see sandwich dials, which this is sort of a play on, everything will be cut out of the dial. Like if you were to look at a Panerai, the 12, 3, 6, 9 would be cut through that. So playing off that gives it a distinct feel, but also gives a really fantastic sense of depth to this dial. When you look down in there, there's just a lot going on, lots of sides to things, lots of edges. And it's one of those things that's just, from a manufacturing and design standpoint, sort of like a hellish thing for them to have done. And I happen to appreciate that they did that, because, they have an idea, they have a design, they just go for it. They work on it, and they execute it extremely well. Think about how that floating dial has to sit perfectly in there, how those numerals have to sit perfectly on that. Anything is a little off here, and you would see it. So, it all looks fantastic. Plus, there's overprinting on the surface in there as well. There's a waveform pattern here, which is very slight, adds just a nice little bit of texture. And then you have the text on here, the Fair logo, automatic, and this red depth rating printed on top of that, as well as Swiss made, of course. And overall, the dial layout, I think it's really nice for a dive watch. It's very punchy, very easy to read. Obviously, when it's glowing, those cutouts glow really, really bright. They did a fantastic job with the lume there. So it really, ticks all the boxes for a dive watch, for a modern sport watch. The Sunray, for my personal taste, honestly, the I'm much more, obviously, of a kind of a muted person, a little bit more of a subdued person. Sunray blue isn't my favorite thing. I think it works well here for what they were achieving. This might not be the version of this watch that I would personally choose because the blue is just a little bright for me. But if you're looking for that modern, punchy kind of blue dive watch, I think they really nailed it here and gave you something that's quite unique. Looking now at the hands, you have hour and minute hand in a fence post style. This is pretty true across all of the fairer watches. They have similar hands. I think they're a little bit larger on the dive watches, obviously for visibility there. The color that they use there is a really beautiful red, but it's not quite like a fire engine red. It has a little bit more kind of an orange in it. It's a touch more of a kind of coral color. It's beautiful. It really pops off the blue there. Then you have a stick second hand with their signature kind of fairer A arrow tip here in fluorescent yellow. Once again, really stands out. They really like to play with color. So here, you have the three colors, blue, red, and yellow. Looking now at the internal bezel, they went with silver here, kind of a brushed metal. I think it's a really appealing looking internal bezel and kind of a striking choice. I think black would have been maybe the more obvious choice or gone full blue, but they went with silver, which adds, once again, kind of a more contemporary feel, a little, kind of lightens the watch a little bit too. And what's really nice about the internal bezel here is that those numerals and the markers are actually milled in and then filled with black. So it's not just paint on there. And once again, that adds just a little bit of texture and just has a higher end feel than what a pad printed internal bezel might have. So overall, there's just a lot of finesse here, a lot of quality, a lot of thought. And this is just one of three. So the Levin is totally different from this. And the Endeavor, which is probably my favorite of the three styles, once again, is a totally different design. Looking now just quickly at the watch on the wrist, you'll see it fits me, I think, very nicely. 41.5, once again, 45 millimeters lug to lug. Sits very nicely on my 7-inch wrist. Curves down the wrist really beautifully. It's definitely a watch where ergonomics were considered. I've worn it, since we've had it. Not haven't had it that long, but I've worn it as much as I possibly could. It's extremely comfortable. You put it on and you forget about it. 20 millimeter lugs here. And like I said, it features 2 straps in the box, which is fantastic. And these are really high-end straps. So this is a natural rubber strap. It's really thick. It's custom molded. Beautiful just design to it. Works very well with how it fits in here. The integrated shape just works very nicely and once again makes that flow down your wrist really well. On the back side of it actually is a waveform pattern that mirrors what is on the dial there. So once again, that just adds the kind of custom feeling on it. And then you have just a nice simple buckle, but once again, a custom buckle with a Fair A logo in it. And then you have a steel bracelet with this too, which really changes the aesthetic. And often a steel bracelet, you get one or the other, particularly on kind of a higher end watch. And the bracelet would be a $300 surplus. So the fact that they're continuing that or adding that in here is just really high value, kind of speaks to the core concept of the brand, which is making something frankly very luxurious and keeping the price point really accessible. If I were to kind of relate this to anything, I would think of some of the German watch brands that operate in the $1,000 to $3,000 range who offer you a lot at a fair price. It's not a bargain price. It's not a cheap price. But it's something where you're getting a lot for what you're paying for, and you're getting a really high level of execution. So I think here for Fair at $1,295, I can't really think of a Swiss-made watch with a Swiss-made movement that I've seen in the last little while that compares to what they're offering here. Frankly, there have been watches that have come out that have been quite a bit more money that I've kind of wondered why the brand went for that price point when Fair can do this at this price point. So check these out if you're in the market for a dive watch, particularly one with some interesting design features. The Aqua Compressor is certainly worth your consideration.